You're listening to the Hello World podcast, number 37. My name is Sean Wildemuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. On today's show, I have Clemens Vasters. Clemens is a software architect and currently works for Microsoft, where he helps shape the technical strategy for the Windows Azure Service Bus. Before joining Microsoft, Clemens worked on financial software solutions and in consulting, has spoken at hundreds of events in over 40 countries, and has contributed to a number of open source efforts, including starting the dasBlog blog engine. Clemens has a long history of educating developers, having taught some of the first available .NET training courses for developers in Europe in early 2002. When I think of Clemens Vasters, I think of the back-end work that he does on the Windows Azure team, as well as a lot of the work in the dasBlog blog engine. That's why I think today's story is kind of a surprise, in that when he got started, he was doing a lot more graphical work, including some work for TV overlays for sporting events. In this rather long version of the Hello World podcast, Clemens and I talk about that experience, as well as how he started at Microsoft and what it's like working so far from the mothership, since he's now living back near his hometown in Germany. Let's take a listen. I'm really excited about today's show. Today I have Clemens Vasters on the show with me. How are you doing?
I am doing most fabulous.
And you're in Germany these days, since that's, the homeland, as it were.
Yes, this is where I came from. This is where I went back to. I happen to be now within 50. Well, actually, within 20 kilometers really of where I grew up.
Wow.
So that's 15 miles.
Really going home.
Yes, going home. And
you get to watch, your favorite sports teams in Germany actually when they're on. You don't have to wait until 4 a.m. to watch them.
Not only that, but I'm also just probably 8 miles from the stadium.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I can. I have a season ticket, and so I see all the games that I can of Borussia Mönchengladbach, which is the home soccer town town team. Nice. And they're playing the first league.
But I still see you on Twitter watching the Mariners. Is that right?
Oh, yes. So since I lived over in Seattle for 6 years, I liked American football before, but I had no concept whatsoever of baseball. And then acquired a liking for baseball through watching the Mariners, and only then discovered that the Mariners were not actually very good. But luckily, this is changing this year, and they're at least in contention for the second wildcard spot, which is not too bad.
No, not at all. Not at all. They're doing well. They beat up on my Braves recently, so I don't have
they did.
Very good feelings about them at the moment, but you know how that goes. So, of course, the podcast is all about how you got started. So did you have a computer growing up?
I did have a computer growing up. So the story of the acquisition of that computer was that I had a friend talked about computers, and then I saw an ad somewhere in the paper, but it wasn't computer related paper. It was like a general magazine. And then I found that interesting, but it was kind of not it was like more like a toy thing,
sure.
Interest. And that was with 13. And then, but I decided I really wanted to have one, and so the one that was offered was kind of in the local newspaper. They had a section about miscellaneous stuff, and so there was a Sinclair's ZX81 computer with 1 kilo of memory, which sounded like a lot.
It did sound at the time.
Yeah, I mean, 1 kilo of memory. I was thinking, wow, if it's that heavy, then it's got to be awesome. So I went and bought that from all the money I had saved. I mean, I was 13.
Sure.
So that was like 120 marks, I think. I bought that thing used. And then sat down and then realized that everybody had the Commodore VIC-20 and the Commodore 64 down the road. And then, but nobody else had what I had.
Right.
So the only way to do anything with it, to play a game, was to sit down and just write the game. And so I learned BASIC, and this ZX81 was fabulous because it was because of the constraints, basically. So it forced you to think hard about how much and how you would do things because of just 1K of memory. Then eventually you got the 32K memory expansion. And and basically wrote all my own stuff, and then occasionally you would get a tape, and you could go and get some of the stuff on tape, and then in parallel, kids around me would get, and I was 13, and so we're now talking 1983, 82, 83,
right?
And so around me, kids started to having computers, a few of them, not very many. And then in school, it turned out we had a very forward-looking few teachers at my school. What was my high school? So my high school is Gymnasium an der Gartenstraße in my hometown. And so the two gentlemen, Mr. Maser and Mr. Fell, they were very forward looking, and they had a fully decked out computer room with Tandy TRS-80.
Oh, those are very popular.
And it was enormously forward looking. That they were the only school, that was sheer luck in probably in the entire state with that sort of equipment.
Wow.
So they had I think 10 of them set up, and they had them all wired together using a common, I think, an audio line where they could go and basically push the button on the tape deck in the front, and then all the computers would download the same program.
Oh wow!
So they had this all connected together in that way.
And this is all before networking.
Oh, absolutely!
Yeah,
before that.
Yeah.
And then they kind of acquired the TRS-80 Model 3 that had the floppies, and then they had some external floppies. So we started using CP/M, and so it was all kind of, as those things were current. I just had the good luck to be in a school that was very well equipped, and it wasn't a fancy, special private school. That was just the public school I happened to be in.
Wow.
Where the teachers were just so farsighted to say, hey, this will matter.
And were you sort of the teacher's pet back then? A lot of us were in the computer room. We were the one that was hanging around after school and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a group of folks who most of which actually ended up in the industry in one way or the other. Who always hung around, and we had this special afternoon workshop group, and so we would hang out in the computer room and then do good things and bad things.
Of course.
Yes, and so that was I think that was a great foundation. And what we started, so I started with BASIC on the Sinclair, and then I kind of in parallel, probably a year later, started first BASIC on the TRS-80, and then we already started with Pascal then in school, and then kind of in I think in 10th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. And then through the school system in Germany is a little bit different, because kind of you go 13, at my time it was 13 years, but kind of the last 2 years are kind of reaching already a little bit into college.
Sure.
In terms of general education. So It's a little different. And so we learned Pascal kind of throughout the last years, and the teacher was always a little bit ahead of us, but not by much.
Right.
And so we were kind of learning together. So I was lucky to be literally the first generation of kids who kind of benefited from that setup in that particular school. And so I really need to thank the parents association from that school, and then also the city of Mönchengladbach, who just made that possible, because that really helped the career start.
I'm sure I
wouldn't be where I'm at if I wouldn't have gotten that start.
Did you know that that was your trajectory at that point? You were 16 or 17. Did you know that was the passion you had?
No. So I was a little torn because I always I need to add one more thing. My dad was a district chimney sweep. Oh, that's a interesting concept. The chimney sweeps in Germany are the police for everything that has to do with heating systems.
Oh, okay. That's not what I imagined. That's a better explanation.
And so there's effectively they get assigned, like police, a district, and then in that district they are the supervisor, effectively have the supervisory role, and then they also sweep the chimneys, of course.
Sure.
And so for that was all massive paperwork. So for that purpose, once I kind of knew a little bit of programming, he said, "I will buy a computer if you write me a program that will help me with the paperwork." So I got into business programming at like 16 and a half, 17, because I wrote that program for my dad, and I invented, in quotes, and I indexed sequential databases and all kinds of things because I didn't look around much.
Right.
But I just, how do I make this faster? Well, you can probably just store a little bit of that data over in that smaller file. So like kind of like, so exploring and finding stuff out that way. And then, but in parallel, and this is kind of where the confusion came from, where it wasn't clear. I had jobs with German television stations around, for production help with ARD and ZDF, which are the German major public television station, and a little bit with one of the emerging private stations, mostly around sports.
Oh, okay.
So the young gentlemen with whom I worked at that time, some of those ended up in journalism, and in sports journalism. Some of them ended up in TV, tech. Some of them ended up in being in entertainment in general. So there was because I had so good connections into this TV production era, because I've been working there since I was 16, kind of with production help, but then you get to know people, et cetera.
Sure.
It wasn't so clear at all that it was going the technology side, because that TV side was obviously very interesting.
Yeah, and that was technology was changing there as well. So I mean, it wasn't just that one was cool and one was emerging. It was everything was changing at that moment.
Yeah, it was around that time in 90. So like kind of when I was at the tipping point, like what are you going to do? It was like 91 when the first HD television trucks showed up, where things were starting to become digital also in that world. So right. That was, and it was interesting because sometimes those things kind of overlapped. Like one of the jobs that I had from the TV side really was with I was a helper with the Mediterranean Games in Athens.
Uh-huh.
So there was a German production company that ran all this, Vigedata, they still exist. And they hired helping hands kind of out of the community. And so we flew down to Athens for like 7 weeks.
Oh, wow.
To go and set up and then kind of help with the production of the entire TV and time measurement stuff. And they had two divisions. One was the TV division. The other one was the data management and timekeeping division, effectively. And the timekeeping division needed to have some urgent fix-ups of stuff that they had programmed, but that didn't quite work. But they didn't have enough people to actually deal with that.
Sure. So
they sat me in front and said, "We heard you know." And I said, "Oh, I don't know how much I know." And then they just put me in front of I think a SCO Unix box where the program was written in C. And God, I had no idea.
Sure.
But I fixed it.
Oh, nice.
I don't know how I fixed it, but I fixed it.
I thought in C you fix everything by adding casts. Doesn't that fix everything?
In that... It was something like this, or it was dereferencing a pointer.
Right.
one of the two. But that was a very fun kind of intersection of those two areas. So technology, television technology, that was actually the intersection. There was mostly all the funky graphics that they put into the sports casts.
Yeah.
that was kind of all at that point, like the hottest cutting edge emerging technology. Like how do you, and this was how that company actually got big. They did all the graphics for Formula One racing and for, all the big sports events. They did all those things because they were the best in the business in Europe.
Wow.
And so that's how that company got big. And of course it always had to do with the computers. And so that was kind of a natural intersection, but that was only kind of, as it was like a hired help in that space.
Sure.
But it was interesting to observe. And at that point I was like 20. So, it was interesting to go and look whether, are you going to go down this path or are you going to go down this path?
Yeah. That's always the big question. And what turned that for you?
So, so I was in the military, because we had to at the time, mandatory service, 15 months. And also there I was in the, so I went to the military, I was 19 and, 3 months in the green, as we say, eating dirt. And then I was lucky to spend the 12 months with the, helicopter forces in the headquarters in Cologne. And also there was like a computer element to it. And so that kind of trended in that direction. And even though I then had journalism TV kind of in my head, ultimately I decided that I wanted to learn the computer science informatics, as it's called.
Sure.
Because that seemed like a better thing to do, because it was so. I saw how it's universally useful.
Right, because you were seeing it in all the different places, military,
it popped up in the
TV
thing,
as well as computer.
In the army, popped up at home, and so that seemed like the universal thing. And because the barrier of entry was very low, right?
Yeah.
And then I went to school. The technology university at Aachen, and then found that I actually had signed up for math, which I didn't expect, because the professors there were very open about weeding out. Basically, what they wanted to try to do is, because so many people signed up and they didn't have so few actual focus. Spots to kind of focus on the later studies. Yeah. They used math as the way to break people's necks and basically get them out. And so the beginning, like the first 2 years, were just hell in math. Wow. And where the professor shows up in the first class, like first class, and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're doing this course usually in 2 semesters for everybody who studies math, but since you are all geniuses, we're going to do it in one semester." Wow. So they were just out to try to get people out, and they were, in my case, pretty successful, because it turned out that the lure of outside money was a little bit stronger, because companies were just hiring, people whoever could program had any talent whatsoever.
And this was around what, 92?
That was around 91, 92.
Yeah. And it was just starting to explode.
Yeah, everybody was trying to get programmers in any way. Yeah, and so and they were offering salaries that were well above the average household income. Yeah. And so I looked at this. Are you going through hell, or are you going to go and make some money? And as many of my classmates, we said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to go through this. Yeah. There's no point. And just went down the money road, and stayed nominally in school for a while, but then kind of did what Bill Gates did and many others, and
including me.
We'll figure this out later. Yeah. And this only came back to bite me once later.
Oh, really?
But yeah, we can get to that in a little bit. So And so I got my first job with a very small, firm who had some sound ideas. But unfortunately not the money for it. So they ran out of money pretty quickly, but they got me kind of hooked to Windows because what they wanted to do is they wanted to build a graphical calculation tool for the graphics industry.
Oh, interesting.
And so all the graphics industry, for advertising and printing and et cetera, the war wasn't decided between Mac and Windows at that point.
Right.
But the notion was that all of these things would be happening in GUIs, and whatever tools they used were still all text mode. So his idea is we're going to go, and that was a differentiator at the time. We're still talking 92.
Yeah.
Is let's make a tool that allows you to basically log work and log hours, but let's do it in Windows. And today it's unthinkable that that's a thing, but it was at the time because building business applications in Windows, that was kind of a thing because you had no frameworks.
Right. You were writing pure C.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I was writing Turbo Pascal because Turbo Pascal for Windows had just come out.
Oh, really?
Yes. And because I was a Borland boy for years and years and years and years.
That explains a lot.
And so that had just come out. And then I kind of taught myself Windows through the lens of Turbo Pascal for Windows, which was a fairly raw Win32 view on the world.
Yeah.
Just reformulated into Turbo Pascal, which forced me to do probably more learning than I would have had with C because I didn't have MFC and any of the abstractions there.
Right.
Because MFC was kind of already emerging at the time. It was kind of the times of Visual C++, 5. Non-Visual C++, C++5.
Right.
C++5. And then, that company unfortunately didn't make it. And then a buddy of mine who I had been running a BBS system with, so many things, for like 2 years said, hey, I work at this place and you should talk to my boss. And then I went there and they made software for credit application management and for financial collections.
Oh, interesting.
And that's where I got stuck for like 9 years then. So from 91 to 2000, or actually 92 to 2000, I worked for that company called A-Bit. They still exist. And wrote apps for banking solutions, mostly back office banking solutions.
Sure.
And that's where and I was, since I had Windows experience and they were looking to build applications and GUI applications. And initially they were thinking Windows and then later they were thinking OS2 because the customers wanted.
Right.
I was the guy with Windows experience. So ultimately my career started being a GUI guy. And then.
Which is odd because that's not how I think of you at all.
No, but then quickly as as things progressed, the systems we built at that company were enormously demanding in terms of complexity. Mm-hmm. And arguably we didn't have the right, for what we needed to do, we didn't have the right tooling or even model yet, because that was the time of mid-90s. We're talking, the big thing is client server.
Right.
The PC has won. That was already clear. And now you have networks. So Novell Network was the king of the hill, and we had a network. But it wasn't so clear yet that running software on the server side wasn't that much of a big hit, because we had not been far away from host times to see that that was actually good in it, because we were too obsessed with the PC as a computing platform. And the only thing we would allow then eventually was having a database in the middle.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it was like the record managers, like we used Beatrieve, sitting around shared disk. basically on the network, and then NetWare and Btrieve, they would do together the magic of locking all the files and stuff like this. And then eventually the wisdom set back in that, actually having a server and running some stuff on the server would not be bad. And then we had a SQL Server. Interestingly enough, we picked that up in version 4.2 for OS 2.
Oh, for OS 2, interesting.
Yes, that was the first thing that I ran. We ran 4.2 for OS 2, then later on Windows NT. So now this is like 93, 94. And we did that. We did that mostly because the alternative was running Oracle. And just for dev purposes, that seemed enormously expensive.
Yeah.
And then we also thought that Microsoft might eventually win the war in terms of just being less expensive than the other guys, which turned out to be right. And so that's what step by step, I kind of got myself more into the Windows universe. But then seeing that we had this common we had the common database, and we had more and more modules. Like I started slipping down into the, how do you organize business logic, and how do you organize modules, and how do you organize stuff so that you can have, 20 people working on a project and they don't get into each other's way. And then ultimately with, we should probably go and move some of that processing back to the server. So that's how I became a distributed systems guy, mostly along those projects of, figuring out what's the right way to go and organize something that becomes really complicated.
And was this in the DCOM days, or did you?
That was all in DCOM days. Yes.
My condolences.
Well, it was mighty difficult,
yes.
Especially with security, and then with all the different threading models, because really nobody could explain or understand how that really worked. But because if you look back at the explanations that people gave, I'm not going to name anybody, they were kind of still very esoteric.
Yeah.
In terms of like a normal person. So the funniest thing is now when you look back and look at today, Node.js is a single threaded apartment.
It is.
It is, right?
Absolutely.
But if anybody had explained, look, there's a queue in front of that thing, and then you take a little job out of that queue and you process it and then put that back into the queue, I might have understood that. But the single threaded apartment was a little bit abstract in terms of how that all worked. So, yes. So condolences, because we had to fight through this without really understanding what was going on.
It was all by experimentation and observation. There wasn't the docs weren't all that clear because they were written by the guys who came up with it, and they're usually the wrong guys to write the docs.
Yes, and then it was all it was in the end pretty deterministic and clear what that was supposed to be, but nobody on the outside understood how that all ought to work.
Absolutely. And so did that sort of move you into the space of wanting to work for Microsoft? You seem to be becoming more and more ingrained in that space. Yeah.
So I picked up Olay I happened to be then in a lot of the beta programs because we were active. I was active on CompuServe back in the day.
I have to ask, do you remember your number?
No.
Okay. Every once in a while I find somebody who remembers their number, and I remember
my FidoNet note number, but that was 244/8, but I can't remember my CompuServe number. And so we got to kind of get enrolled into all kinds of betas back in the day, and including the Olay beta. And I looked at Olay, and at that time I was already so far away from the GUI stuff that it was kind of peripherally interesting to me, but I found that component object model stuff, I found that very interesting.
Yeah.
And so I got into, and then as I was reading through those things and kind of starting to understand it, the OpenDoc product manager from IBM showed up in the Microsoft CompuServe forum and effectively started saying, this is all crap. You should all go to OpenDoc. And I was young, energetic at the time, and decided that I will go and happily pick up that fight with him, and had a very long, prolonged email exchange with exchange on that forum with that guy. And as that ended, and I kind of had won, the Microsoft guys then sent me email and said, that was pretty impressive, even without help. How about you work for us? So that was in probably 94-ish. And then I sent them my resume, and nothing happened. And then I learned about 3 years ago now, I actually met the guy who was the hiring manager, who actually asked me, and he said, well, there was so much chaos, and I remember this, and it was total chaos, and then I just dropped the ball, so I'm sorry.
Wow.
Yeah, so there are the millions of riches that I missed because he dropped the ball, because, I could have joined Microsoft in 94, and that was a good time to do that.
That was a very good time to do that.
Yeah, and I was still, very independent, and not there were no family matters to look at all.
Yeah.
So moving to Seattle would have been fairly straightforward, I guess.
Unlike
and it ended up being fairly straightforward down the road, but
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I spent 2 years for that same company, banking software company in New York City.
Oh, nice.
95 and 96, running their development center. But and the folks that I recruited, most of them I was still friends with, and they're also doing well in the industry. And then started in 2000 and started my own company, and that's kind of how I started to be visible, because the company Nutelligence we founded in 2000 ended up being, without us wanting to do that initially, ended up being a training company, and the founding kind of coincided with .NET being presented.
Yeah,
and through a unplannable and how can I say? We didn't intend this at all, but to a unplannable set of coincidences, we became the primary .NET basic training provider in classroom provider in Europe, way before anybody else did.
Wow!
So we wrote what we got a contract from Microsoft Consulting Services in Germany. Because they had no docs at all.
Right. And
docs in the beginning were very, very, there was not a lot of material there at all. And so they said, we need to have training for ourselves, and we also need to have training for the rest of the field. So they raised money internally and looked for a partner who could do this. And since I had run into those guys at Tech at Europe, where I spoke, because I had written my own SOAP stack in 99, 2000s. And I was at a previous conference, and the Microsoft people said, hey, you should come there. So at TechEd, where I spoke because of SOAP, that was my first public talk of any size, TechEd 2000s.
Wow, that's a big first talk.
Yeah. Oh, it was. I had 750 people in my first talk.
Wow, that's a scary first talk.
Oh, that was enormously scary, and it was. That was a big one. That was, I think that was the same TechEd where Don did it. Don Box did his bathtub performance.
I think so. The shower scene, that one.
Yeah. And so that's when I did my first talk. So that's actually not so long ago. And then I met those guys, the MCS people, and they're like, and then I said, hey, we're looking to do that .NET thing. Or we had continued discussions. And then somehow we got that job, and then we produced this within very short time. This set of education materials, write-ups plus slide decks, and they become very popular. And then Microsoft Press in Germany picked up all that material and turned that into a book, which was the first .NET book on the market.
Nice.
So all of a sudden we got name recognition. And then said, okay, if we can do this, then we can go and also do classroom training. We had secured the rights to use that same material for our own classroom training.
Nice.
and then started doing classroom training. It kind of was the birth of Intelligence. And then at some point, as I was getting more and more into the speaking scene, and then knowing more people from Microsoft over time, by 2006, then the recruiting pressure had mounted so much that I said, yeah, okay. So I'll come, because there was a big project internally at Microsoft, which I found really interesting, and kind of started moving on from Indigo, which I observed kind of from the outside world. So that would turn into WCF.
Yeah.
Where they had planned an application server of sorts that never came to fruition, but that was kind of the goal of it. And I found that very attractive. And so I decided that, moving there might be a good idea. And then my wife and I, or then wife to be, and then wife shortly before we moved, decided that we want to go. And then we went, and then I worked for Microsoft.
And was the stuff you were working on sort of the precursors to Azure and all the stuff you've been doing in the middleware there?
Yeah. So I got into the middleware, and so I got first into the WCF team, and I caught kind of the tail end of all that development. So the WCF, as we know it, was largely already done in terms of design. There was some tweaks, but it was largely done. And so I picked up I was the community PM, mostly because I did a lot of community stuff, and then it seemed like a good idea, kind of good spot to kind of orient myself what I want to do.
Sure.
So I did that job for a while, and the project that sprung up was see, I'm still thinking about, oh God, this is a secret. I can talk about it, but it turns out I can talk about it. What's called Ultra, and later Oslo.
Right.
And Oslo is something that you may have heard about, because that ended up being the modeling effort. So there were actually two sides of that. There was a modeling effort. There was also a runtime effort. So that runtime effort, that kind of got that fizzled out, kind of, for all kinds of reasons.
Did that fizzle out before the public? I did a lot of Oslo talks on M and
yeah, that fizzled out before all that stuff got public.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Oslo was not originally Oslo was not a modeling effort. Actually, it was a composite effort of modeling in a runtime. And then the runtime pieces kind of showed up in different places. So I'm not going to go and be specific about that.
Sure,
but,
that's fine.
The runtime parts eventually did show up here and there, but not as a thing that was kind of initially envisioned. And of course, all that vision was footing on the wisdom, in quotes, of that integrated web services WStar stack.
Yeah.
We kind of are now mostly over that.
It feels that way. The WS Star Stack always bugged me a little, even from sort of its first initial offerings, because it seemed to just add complexity into something that seemed to be simple. Every time we tried to, grab onto WS security, it would complicate the SOAP stack, and then on and on. And I think that was sort of its, at least in my worldview, is as polluted as that is. That seemed to be sort of its death now.
It's kind of hard to judge this with hindsight.
Of course.
Because now we are like, yeah, you just post this JSON thing and you're okay. Because the world certainly didn't look as easy. Maybe for some visionaries it did, but it certainly didn't look so easy. And then JSON, the idea had not gained any foothold.
Yeah, like we needed one more data format. I'm with you.
Yeah, so during the time, I think XML was not yet seen as the great evil, and packaging application data into XML didn't seem so bad,
right? And
having something that you can have as routable packages, that didn't seem so bad. And I think it just went strange in a way that everything that existed anywhere else in the protocol stack was then jammed into SOAP, and I think that was all wrong.
Yeah.
So as W security, that was the grandest failure in all this, because it was just overly complicated. Because what it tried to do is it tried to be a super good citizen. There was all around good intent, because you took the existing XML digital signature, you took the existing XML encryption, you took the existing XAML definitions, and then you jam it all into one thing. But then it got overly complicated.
Yeah,
and of course, everybody who worked on it was obsessed with completeness,
right?
Which made it even worse. So we're now landing in a place when you think about OAuth. If you look at OAuth 2 and if you look at OpenID Connect, those things are not by no means easy.
No,
but they're just magnitudes less complicated than the WStarted stuff was.
Yeah, and in some ways, even though they're not easy, there's a lot of work, but each of the pieces is simple. Whereas that wasn't always the case with WS Security and some of the other WS things.
That's right. So going back to that, that was kind of this whole application server thing. And then as that kind of started to move towards more of the modeling thing, which kind of materialized pretty much in kind of the tail end of 2006, when I was finally over in Redmond, because I had like half a year of time where I was still here in Europe because of visa. We were waiting for the visa. So in the tail end of that was kind of when where WCF had shipped. So Windows Vista shipped, and then WCF shipped with that. That kind of people started to orient around that new thing. And then towards the beginning of 2007. And then as the effort kind of turned in a way that it was clear that it was mostly going to be modeling and not so much on that runtime, which I was interested in, I got asked to whether I would be joining this little incubation team that was building this thing called the Relay and the token service. And so John Shushak, who is now our technical fellow for the DX team, former DPE team, our evangelism team, he's over there now. He had kind of initiated that out of the WCF team, and then Dennis Pilarinos and David Wartendijk, also both not in the company anymore. Those guys had kind of started this effort as a two-man team, and then I was asked whether I would be interested in joining that, and I kind of joined them in February 2007. And since then, I have the same job, and I'm kind of driving initially co-driving, and now kind of mostly in the driver's seat for the technical strategy around that, the service bus, and kind of by now the entire messaging story.
That has to be exciting. Are you still interested in that? I mean, I know
it's enormously scary. I can tell you that, but it is. So it's not so the good thing is it's not a solo endeavor, right? So I went and made, for instance, I sat down and wrote a prototype so I basically just put myself into isolation and wrote this prototype for 2.5 months, which was called Iguazu. And that turned out into notification hubs, as it is now in Azure.
Oh, nice.
This whole notification infrastructure for mobile devices, which actually had some more runway and some other features as well. And it's great because I can go and they let me figure stuff out, like a chunky piece of functionality, and then of course it all goes to reviews and refinement, and then the product team effectively picks this up and then turns the prototype into something that's real, and that's something that I can't do all by myself. And we're having something that's similar right now going on with an extended push into supporting digital infrastructure, connected products, etc., Internet of Things in quotes.
Yeah,
which is similar. Which is kind of a similar effort where we're trying to, make something, prove out that stuff works, and then make sure that we land that right in the product. But it's there are checks and balances. But if you're out ahead, then it's fun to be working with the resources of a very large company.
Absolutely. So here's a question I've been asking a lot of, or at least the latest speakers about, and that is, you look back at kind of where you started with that first computer and your first jobs and such. With the exception of maybe Microsoft dropping the ball and not hiring you in '94, what would you change any decisions you made about where you focused, what you focused on, or even whether you wanted to become a developer at all?
I have landed in the perfect spot. I don't know what to change. It's hard to. I have no regrets at all about nothing. And I think that's also the only way how you can live your life without killing yourself.
That's true.
But I have no. I don't think I would have changed anything. Even though I have to say, you see, I mean, during your career, if it lasts for a while, you meet a lot of people,
yes.
And then here or there, you have people who have gone with you part of the way, and then they go somewhere else, and then they become part of this mega IPO, and all of a sudden are mega multimillionaires, and you're like, well, you could have done that too, and rake in the mega millions through an IPO. So that is something that is you look at it and you're like, okay. But they're still friends,
yeah.
And if they invite me to their house, I will be in a nice house, and so that's okay, and I can live with that. I have no regrets in that direction, really, because where I'm at right now is fabulous. The company is giving me a fabulous deal because I can be at home. It's it's not a typical arrangement, but it also has to do with the fact that I'm making a compromise. By having a work day that more mirrors, in terms of hours, more mirrors that of a waiter.
Sure.
By being available for meetings until 9 in the evening.
Yeah.
But
I'm familiar with that problem while we're on the road. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a fabulous setup. So right now I'm happy, and really I think in the next 3-4 years, the things that we can go and do with the resources of the company in the space that we're looking at are going to be very interesting. And I also believe that we have a lot to offer in that area, and that we can go and bring a lot of innovation into that space. So that's fun. Because making stuff up ultimately is one thing I like doing, and they let me do it. So it's fabulous. So I don't know. You can never know what the decisions you're making, what they end up.
Absolutely.
Being. And there's a lot of luck involved, of course.
Of course, in every case. But
there's also a lot of hard work involved. You make your career, and ultimately that's why people say, what is your career plan? And then there's career planning and blah, 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 in the company, etc. And I don't care much, because I'd rather be drifting, because so far the drifting works out.
And it seems like you've been able to stay passionate about what you do and stay close to the things that you're passionate about. And I think the people who stay true to what they enjoy doing, seem to have the happier life, and in many cases the better career. Yeah.
I mean, and if you look at the most important thing is that you need to keep learning.
Yes.
Learning is the key thing. You need to be ready to just learn and to question the things that you have. And also, of course, be aware of the investment that you have in yourself. So there's an investment that you're building in terms of knowledge, but then also be keenly aware of how that investment might hold you back in conquering the territory for yourself.
Absolutely. So
I think that's important. So learning and to be aware of your knowledge base and where you have deficits, and then kind of keep replenishing the knowledge base with new data. I think that's an important part. And that's kind of the background task that happens while you are doing the actual work.
I think that's absolutely true. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast. This has been an amazing show. I really appreciate your story. And I just love hearing the passion. Every time I see you at a conference or at an event, you're always excited about what you're doing. And that's awful infectious.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to the Hello World podcast.